So I decided partway through unboxing, which I meant to do this before, to go ahead and do an unboxing and test video for my new Creality K1 Max, which immediately out of the box I found problems with. Picked it up to come put it on my table here and heard things rattling around inside and found these 3 screws rattling around in there. And what I finally deduced is that those are actually the lockdown screws that are supposed to be holding this in place. You see the hole there with the little arrow on it. Those are the 3 screws that one of the first things you're supposed to do is remove those to release the bed. And what I have now determined, of course, my initial concern was, did they send me a used unit? I'm not sure if that's the case. I'm hoping not. Bought this through MatterHackers. I would expect them to be more reliable than that. But what I suspect happened is that whoever did this assembly, there's actually a foam block back here that I believe has to be removed, although I haven't tried lifting the carriage and removing it yet. But I suspect when they drove it down, they didn't drive it down far enough. And if I drop the screw in, you can see that there's the hole that's supposed to go in. But if I drop these screws into this hole right now, they will not actually reach that hole. They just touch the top. So somebody probably put it in there, ran their tool, and it didn't tighten down, but that didn't stop them. Now I'm resisting the temptation to turn the phone vertical because these printers tend to look a little better vertical, but this is my whole reason for buying that. This has been my trusty Robo 3D R1. I actually had the original Robo 3D, and when the R1 came out, it had a few improvements, so I upgraded and sold my other one used. But this has been a trusty workhorse. Unfortunately, prints were getting degraded, and I'm like, well, it's time finally, after many, many years, to replace the tip, was my assumption. I got in, replaced the tip, but in the process, thought I'd ruined my temperature sensor. Turned out that these things are pretty delicate, and it's easy to blow the Arduino A to D port when you're messing around the temperature sensor. So ended up replacing the Arduino, put new firmware in, and I just couldn't finish a print. I would get about this far and it would just start, something was hanging up and the bed wouldn't go. I'm like, well, did I get the bed bound up when I was undoing it? And I redid it. I downgraded the firmware thinking maybe it's the settings. Chances are, if I get the settings right, I can get this thing going again properly. But for some reason, my best guess is that the Z-axis maybe not lifting properly. Could be one of the drives themselves got damaged too in the process, right? That the stepper motors are losing position. But I think it may just be that it would not lift Z and then it would hook and pull the Y-axis off, and eventually, you know, it would just drift off. And so I gave up repairing this, decided, you know, this was a nice, I bought this because of the big build volume. And so I decided to go up to the K1 to get me to that even larger build. And so, again, love this printer. You know, unfortunately, when Robo went to their newer stuff, they got smaller, so they just didn't have anything that suited me. So I decided to give Creality a shot. And so far, this is not an auspicious start. I'll come back to the box for a moment. There's actually quite a bit of good packing in it internally, and generally put together nice. The instructions are good as far as taking these out in order, etc. And essentially what you have here is on the top, you've got a section that has the top surface, which I have not done anything with. This is now making me wonder, I'm not sure what that comes from. That kind of makes me wonder about did this get returned? Because that looks like somebody printed something on it. That looks like there's some sort of a kitty cat on there. So they may have used this as a build plate. I don't think it would fit, but maybe it does. Interesting. Okay. Anyway, so instruction manual's in there along with that. You got the power cord and you've got the display unit. And we will go from here. Oh, and there's also this little box of stuff, which I'm assuming is filament I haven't actually gotten into. So this is down inside. Looks like plain Jane filament. Not even colored. Sorry, this is fun. Yeah, so just white filament. Can't say I printed with white filament in forever. And this is the door handle stuff you're supposed to attach. This is the very meager spool for holding the, or rod for holding the spool. Somehow I suspect I'm going to have to print something better than that just to keep it from coming off the end, but we'll see. And little rubber feet. Not actually sure what's in there. Hot end. And then the basic toolkit. Obviously not everything you could want because there's some empty holes. Well, since I haven't heard anything back from MatterHackers, and I'm not counting on a positive response here, and the fact that I have to get a print done that's been waiting on this for a replacement, I'm going to go ahead and continue with some of the installation steps here. So the next step is to apply this, and it's got these couple of little plastic hooks that go down into here, so I'm not really thrilled with the mounting scheme, but hopefully it will hold up well enough. And of course the funny part is the label on the front that says, before applying power, please check the 3 platform board fixing screws have been removed to avoid damage to the machine. Well, they were removed before it got here, or never installed correctly. Like I say, when I tried dropping them in, they barely touch the bottom plate, so they don't actually screw in. And a lot of dirt and dust or something there. I don't know if that's just machining stuff or what. So I am going to pause this so that I can free up 2 hands and come back after I put this on. So there are times when differences in stature really have an impact. And in this case, well, somebody with tiny little fingers may be just fine putting this on. This is not made for my big fingers. And so good luck getting that on. I had to slide this all the way off the table though, so that I could at least tilt the display down far enough to have any idea what I was doing, but it was pretty much just blind with my big fingers in the way. And then this is an odd angle here. So get that on, I'm gonna have to stop again. Now with that in place, more or less, you'll see that it is actually above the frame here. And so the door, you will see, boy, that's close. But the door has a notch in the glass that, once I remove the plastic, should be okay, but that just barely clears that guy. So other assembly steps involve putting the spool holder on the back and putting this door handle on. It comes in a kit with these 2 sets of parts and a little bitty set of instructions. And if you can see, there's these 2 little plastic inserts that obviously go in to protect the glass and hold the screws. So those are pretty important. And then I think we got the magnetic latch, I'm assuming, that goes on the inside. So put the screw through the plastic piece, through the magnetic latch, so it's actually not protecting the door that much, and then to the handle. Okay, so just pulling the door back just enough to let me do this, or the plastic on the door back. I've got this in. These are socket head cap screws. So you need the next to smallest Allen wrench in the kit for those. Don't spend a bunch of time with a Phillips screwdriver trying to figure out why this won't go together, because that's not going to work. And then we get to go around the back and install this little guy. So this is a pretty straightforward, just insert and twist. And there we have the spool holder. You'll see we've got an Ethernet connection here, which I may use since all of my network wiring's right behind the wall here. So my little cubby where I have my printers perfectly set up to expand my network capability. I've got my computer that normally runs my system down here, but I don't believe this has a USB port other than the USB port for putting a memory card in, which I don't want to do. And so we just have power, Ethernet, the filter for the fan, and then this is where the filament comes up, and we'll load that here shortly. So I have this roll of red filament that I need to make my print with, and it's getting a little stiff and brittle, especially at the end. But what I'm running into now is I'm getting up here, and you can see the filament's ending right there. There's actually a very sharp kink in this, presumably just from packaging, but the filament will not make this curve. And if I just try pushing it, it's going to jam in there. And as I'm feeling, I can feel that the tube is actually crimped through here. So I'm going to see if I straighten it out, if this filament will go through. But if not, this will probably be the end of this. And we box it up and ship it back. I'm going to attempt to set this camera in a position where I can try to grab and push on the filament, and you can see what's happening. I'm able to get it past it, but it binds and it actually pops when it comes through. So let us see. Sorry for the piece of stuff in the way there, but so right there we're bound. If I push really, really hard, it snaps. You can see the whole printer shakes. Now, as I go past, I'm binding up again through, okay, that's the run-out sensor that I'm running through. And we'll keep pushing on through. I think I see it over there on the far side. Yep. And now we're trying to get around the curve to go down into the printer. We bind up again, and there we are. There's now over here there are two things supposed to be. So there's, talk about a release, which is just a normal pull the pin to release that, but they talk about releasing the, taking the whole tube out to swap filaments and other stuff, which is not something that you generally like to have to do. But you have a lock and an unlock that should be for the actual capture of the filament. So we've got it in the unlock position. See what happens as we push a little further. Yeah, well, I'm binding completely there and without another hand on it. So that's as far as it wants to go. We'll see what happens when we try to actually load this now. Now, so I may go ahead and pull the tube loose, but going from the unlocked, pushing the filament in as far as it will go, and going to lock and then pulling on the filament, it comes right back out. So whatever the lock unlock is supposed to be doing, it's not doing very good for this filament. The one thing I know that I'm really going to miss, it wasn't the greatest loading scheme in the world, but the ability to sit here and just turn the knob and push through the extruder was one of the best features of this printer compared to any Bowden that I've used or otherwise. So I've always really liked the feed mechanism on this. For as early generation of printer as this was, Robo 3D really knew what they were doing. And so, by the way, other than installing the glass top on this now, we are essentially at the end of the setup instructions. After we power the thing up, then it says to go pull the screws, because apparently the menu's going to say this. Although the label says do it before you power the whole thing up. So the next step is what they call install the product, which is simply turn it on and see what happens. So that's where we're headed. All right, I intended to do this the other day before the printer arrived, but I went ahead and installed the Creality Print software. I traditionally use MatterHackers, which does a really nice job with the Robo 3D, but we're going to give Creality a full end-to-end shot here. And behind, you can see I've got their online copy of the manual, which I guess I can quit sharing that. So this manual is much more detailed, continues on from the quick start manual. I don't think that little printed manual that they have has any more of this in there. And so from the stage of first turning it on, there's the whole startup, connect to the network, etc. So we're going to go ahead and go through that. And as we're doing this, I will probably talk a little bit about why I decided to go with this printer versus the other options I was considering. If you've made it here, you already know what this printer is, so I'm not going to give you a whole lot of the specs. I'm going to run without my light now so the display will show it better. So powering it on from the back, which is unfortunately on the far side over there, not the most convenient to get to. But we come up and we get to machine start in progress. And of course there's still a piece of foam that I have to get out from under there, but I tugged on it a little bit and it is pinched too tight and it actually goes up against the bar there. So until the bed raises, I can't get to that. And I am pretty sure that that might be why this thing didn't actually get screwed down properly, because it probably caught the foam and stalled, and that was it. Okay, so we're to English. Let's hit next. Remove the screws. We've done, or actually we didn't have to do, we picked them out of the base. Make sure that it's clear and press OK. And you're seeing my network. And why in the world are we seeing the power connection over here? That's fascinating. Because I believe that is a long way away. That doesn't make sense that this thing can see that at all. These are both 2.4, so that's one thing. We're not seeing my 5 gig network. And I'm not going to let you see my passwords. We'll just pause this here while I get that entered. And the one comment I will make, so we're connected, that's good. You saw that keyboard when it came up. That is incredibly hard to read. I can only hope in the firmware that they improve that, because those the actual number keys are impossible to see on this thing. Luckily, I can touch type and know where the keys are supposed to be on the keyboard, so I was able to do this without having to track it down, but still. Okay. And UTC, we should be, if I remember, we're either -5 or -6. Right now, I think we are -5. We're normally -6. So let's see what time it comes up and says it is. I don't want to go to Creality Cloud. So this is one of the things which I don't like about a lot of the new printers, is this, send us your files so that we can pirate them if we want while we download stuff. I don't trust these guys or anyone else in doing this sort of thing. There's no need for me to cloud print. If I wanted to, I could send this through my own network, through my own VPN. So I don't care about this. So I'm going to skip it. Skip it. Welcome to the self-check process. Please place the printing platform. Take about 11 minutes. So I'm going to leave the door open. Start detecting. Nozzle heating. And the one thing I had intended to check, let's turn the light back on here, is was that nozzle clean? It looks clean. So hopefully that means this wasn't actually ever used. Although, now that I look at it, I'm not sure if that looks clean to me or not. And sorry, I got distracted trying to get a picture of the nozzle, so we're missing part of the startup here. So it went through a homing sequence and brought the nozzle up here to the front, which, by the way, you've got your, I believe is the print camera there. And of course the bed's coming up, and now we can get to this. Okay, it's a full-size piece of foam under the bed. So, and there's a circuit board there that has obviously all the heater components. And so this is what's in there protecting that. But that's also what either means the screws they're using are too short or whatever, but obviously there's no way to get that to reach. So what's it saying we're doing? Flashback off so you guys can see. So now we're input shaping. This is supposed to have this little LiDAR system, which again, who knows how well any of this stuff works. Now, in terms of decisions to go this way, Creality's a mixed bag. I think everybody knows it, and there's a lot of people who complain about their customer service, and we can already see the issue here. But the choices that I had were between three different ones. Still sitting here waiting. So anyway, as I started to say, my choice really was between the K1 Max versus the QIDI or QIDI X Max 3 versus the Bambu X1 with the feeder, the color feeder and everything else. And you know, I've been looking at the Bambu off and on for a while thinking, yeah, someday maybe. And when the printer died, I was like, well, I need something with a large form factor, right? And I wanted something bigger. I tried years ago, I did the FT6, which turned out to be a complete disaster. It's still sitting over there, but it's so much trouble to get a good print out of it that I don't even bother. And decided I wasn't even going to try for the purposes of even temporarily trying to print a print. So, the choices. Bambu X1 was actually the smallest build size, so that was the thing, and it's against it. It's also over $600 more with the color feeder. And do I really need the color feeder? Not necessarily. So, at any rate, that still had me kind of between the Creality versus the QIDI or QIDI. And the thing, you know, I wasn't sure really that the LiDAR and stuff, you know, we'll see if the LiDAR makes any difference at all. If the AI features, you know, I know there's a new firmware version that we'll put in. This was the latest software just released a week ago, I think. But does that matter or not? Not necessarily. But the one thing I did like about this was the bed sensor. The QIDI uses a the little touch sensor, the BL Touch, which I had put on an older Creality, and it worked, but it didn't work well. I always loved the touch sensor, or the contact sensor, where the head actually touches the bed that Robo 3D used. And even though it was disconcerting to see the glass flex every time that thing pushed down into the bed, it worked beautifully, and it never gave me a problem getting the bed level, etc. And so that is the one thing that this has, is that it actually does bed contact leveling. And so that was a driver this way. Creality, for, you know, all their faults, they are at least well known. They've been around for quite a while. I generally trust that the company is going to be around. I really don't know much about QIDI, so it was just new. It's a beautiful looking printer. It had a bigger build volume, but there were just a couple of things in the most basic functionality that I felt like I was taking a bigger risk if I went with that. I did like the idea of the heated cabinet, but I figure, okay, this is at least an enclosed cabinet. I've got it stored in an attic space anyway, so heat's not going to be too much of a problem, even though I'm fully insulated here. And frankly, if I want to put a heater in it, I can come back and put a heater in this thing independently if I really wanted to, without the fear of the reported fire that somebody said had occurred on their X Max. So, with that, we are still sitting here waiting on it to do something, and it's really nothing going on. I know this is supposed to take 10 minutes or so, but I don't see any evidence that the LiDAR's turned on, and it is quite literally just sitting here doing nothing. But it says don't touch it, so I'm not going to touch it. And we'll come back once it starts doing something. And no sooner did I stop recording than it left the input shaping menu and went to auto leveling. Now, the one thing that I had read through the manual, believe it or not, I did actually at least scan the manual before I bought this. I'm going to turn the flash back on so we can actually see something happening here. It actually talks about that you don't do the leveling. So on the Robo 3D, using the MatterHackers software, it's configured to just do the bed leveling every time it starts a print. This indicates you don't have to do that, or they don't expect you to do that. And frankly, this whole input shaping thing, whatever the heck it was doing, I really do wonder, you know, we'll see whether or not I get good adhesion, good level prints, etc., without having to re-level the bed. You know, if this is, so you got 3 screws that drive the bed. So you got 1 in the middle in the back, and you got 2 in the front. I would really love to have seen 4 total. Whoops, there we go to the back to do some leveling. That's interesting that it's not going to the very center. It looks like what it's doing is actually going either side of the lift screw. Doesn't seem to be because there's any reason it can't be centered, because it just went past that, but it almost looked for a moment like it had to move around the screw. But that doesn't appear to be the case. But I do find it interesting that it is actually testing around an asymmetry point. Now it's kind of just dragging along. I guess that's probably because it's using the LiDAR to do this. At least I would hope that's what it's doing. It is a little disturbing you can't see the LiDAR. It's also interesting that it's flipped the fan on. Now, nothing in this has said anything about loading the filament. So I don't know if during any of this process it's going to do any sort of test printing as part of its alignment process. But obviously the filament is not quite there yet. And as exciting as this is, I'm tempted to stop again, except I know as soon as I do, it will start doing something interesting. I would say it would be nice if this had a lot more status to it, so it would actually tell us what it's doing at this stage, how far it has to go, etc. Willing to just walk away from it and leave it alone. Go for it. Oh, there we go. Okay. Turn the fan off. That's back touching the center. What I don't know, without disassembling this, you'll notice how the belt drive for the horizontal and the forward and back, it looks almost like it's a differential drive. I haven't actually looked at it, but you can see how this belt goes to the front, comes across, and then goes to the back. This one comes to the back. So I think that the same drive system is driving both left and right and front and back by differential or driving together. And that may be the XY scheme that's been discussed. I haven't bothered researching it. I just knew I needed a bigger printer, and this seems to be the new style. So anyway, back to the lift scheme. I only see one motor, so my assumption is similar to what Folger Tech tried to do on the FT. They've got one drive motor and a belt that's tying all of these together. So as long as the bed, as long as the factory got this done right, so that the bed was level to begin with, then it should be okay. But if for some reason a tooth slips on that belt, then these screws are all out of sync, and suddenly your whole bed is cockeyed. So, you know, bed leveling's not designed to correct for the fact that you literally have a flaw in your system. Now, one thing, I don't know if you can tell, look back into my attic here, that loop of hose that's going above the extruder is actually going to be dragging across the glass plate when I put that in. Okay, so every time, because remember, the bed goes up and down. This doesn't move. So that loop is already, to me, a pretty significant design flaw. I don't want it to be any sharper than it is on that chain, but I guarantee you that's just going to drag back and forth on the top of this. Self-test completed. Okay. Turn our flash off. Okay. New version is found. Okay, so I'd already downloaded this, but it went online and found it. Fixed occasional issue. Let's load now. Network speed's not too bad here, so we'll just let it download it directly. So this version was released, I want to say, in August, according to the website. And I fully expect to see more and more versions as time goes on. Just how long it will take to actually do the flashing. So it doesn't take too long to get it from the internet. Bouncing around a little bit here. The interesting thing is I'm looking at this on my phone going, okay, that looks blue, but it's actually, that's a gray background, a very dark gray. So color match through the phone sensor isn't perfect. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay, that wasn't bad if that was the full load. And we get to wait on it to reboot. See if it wants to go through its whole alignment process yet again. The other thing I'll have to decide at some point is whether or not I want to take those little yellow tags off of the here's where a screw wasn't holes. And at some point I got to take the plastic off the rest of the stuff. I only took the stuff that's facing inside that would be a problem if I started heating this up. Of course, let the wife come and pull some of it since she loves doing that sort of thing. And we are still waiting. Oh, here comes some fan kicking on. So the interesting thing, so we have this vent fan on the side that is obviously, it's a part cooling, you know, at the level of the fan, so this is going to blow across the whole part, but I'm not exactly sure what good that really is going to do because it can't blow across everything. Interestingly, I'm just noticing the piece of tape that is on there that again is for shipping. Maybe actually if I look at it, the vent, and unfortunately this won't, oh here, let me turn the light back on, that will help. Come on, turn the light on. There we go. First off, that looks dusty inside. Has this thing really been running? Or is it just that the flash makes everything look dirty? But I would call this a shipping tape. Not that I really need to remove it, and of course it's got sticky all behind. But what I don't want is I don't want it getting hot and falling off, you know, even a year from now. Okay. So, looking at that vent, this may actually be intended to circulate around a little bit, but I can't tell for sure that that's the case. Okay, we're back to the display. And we're seeing the temperature dropping now that it's logging. We've got a file system, and it comes with some speedy holder. Do I go for broke and just print my thing? Do I print a benchy? don't have a lot of hours to waste here, so I really just want to print my part. Got a spool holder. I think I'm going to try their software, see what happens when I load my part, and see just what it thinks about it. But we shall see. So I'm going to pause that here. We'll come back once we start doing something with it. So by the way, you can look at this online, but this is the extent of what it says about loading the filament, right? You got the little switch, and whether or not it really loaded properly, I don't know. And it says when printing low temperature such as PLA, leave the top off. Now the reality is I don't necessarily want to leave the top off all the time, and frankly having a warm interior would be helpful to some extent. But the big question I will have is I have a part that I regularly print that pretty much takes up the whole bed on my existing printer, or the Robo 3D, and I have to print it with a raft because otherwise it's going to lift up and it's going to ruin the print. So I really want to know if this thing will print without needing a raft. Okay, so I'm going to go for broke and print these two parts, which I need to ship out. And these are the same ones that you saw sitting, the base of them on the other printer. I design all my stuff to print without support. So these are all designed to print without support. I know with the MatterHackers and the Robo 3D they will. I started to modify the default set of settings, but found that by default they have support turned off. Partway through slicing it says, hey, you don't have any support, this might fail, do you want to add it? Which of course I said, no, go away, leave me alone. So we will see now when I tell it to start printing. The one thing it did do, and I think this is automatic, the base piece is relatively thin, so it added a brim, and I was tempted to go in and force that off, but I think I'll go ahead because I need this part to succeed. I'm going to go ahead and let it print with a brim, and I'll have to clean that off, but that shouldn't be a big issue. Otherwise, the G-code preview looks pretty good. So if we drag through their tool, and I need to stop sharing again. If we drag, you can see it as it builds up. And we are essentially ready to go. We're going to let it run at its full 300. So these are all the default settings. I normally print with 3 perimeter layers, but for this part it's thin and the layers are so close together anyway, I don't think it really needs the additional layer. But if I decide it's not strong enough, I'll reprint it. So with that, it's saying land printing. It didn't ask me anything about where it is. The only thing when I set up the software is it says, okay, what printer do you have and what nozzle size is on the printer, which by default is supposed to be 0.4. And I am used to, and I'm assuming if I come over to device, device list is empty. I wonder, land printing. Scan add, okay. Searching for device. I wonder if I had told it to print, it probably would have jumped over here. There we go, K1 Max. Okay. Printing has stopped. Now, the one thing I always tend to do is I always preheat while I'm getting a model loaded and things like that, so I'm not sure in this software where all that stuff is hidden. But we're just going to go ahead and hit start and see what the heck happens here. I'm leaving the plastic on the door because the tape is there just in case I do end up packing this thing back up to ship it. So so we don't have the prettiest view. Oh, I think this is the preview print. So this is showing real time what this thing's going to do. So that's worthless. Let's stop this. I thought when I was in preview, when I hit start, it would really start, not a... So, device. Land printing. Okay. Details. Okay, now we get to see the bed. Guess I should have read the help manual on this. Okay, so here's all the controls that I would expect to have. Nicely laid out. This is fine. The one thing we have not done is we've not done any sort of load process here. So it is reading out the temperatures of all the sensors. It's got files. So interesting. Do I have to import? What happens here? Does this let me... it's taking me to a G code, so I can load a G code. How do I... Let's go back over to our prepare. So we sliced it. We know it's ready. We previewed. I don't need to slice it again. We previewed it. All right, let's go back to the device. And I'm going to have to put the phone down and spend some time fiddling with this until I figure out, because the first thing I want to do is make sure that this stupid filament is loaded properly. So the part I had missed is that the land printing button that is down here on the preview page is actually a button. Initially, I was thinking this was a selection, and I didn't realize with the highlighting that, well, that's still a button to be pressed. So when I press it, it comes up and says, do you want to print this? It's going to take 4 hours. And yes, we do. And then it comes back over to the device. K1 Max, which is here. Do I select the device? Is that what I do? Send G-code. One-click printing. I probably want to do that. But there we go. Okay. So that's interesting. So it doesn't take me to the device status. It actually sends this on down to the device. Probably should have said print calibration. But let's go to the live view now and see what it thinks it's doing. Nothing. Just the device, and if I come back over to the screen on the device, nothing happening. So back to the little land printing page. Print progress 0. Details. If I hit details, that takes me to this page. Oh, so it's downloaded to the device now. I have to print with calibration. Let's make sure we calibrate. So let's print with calibration. Now, back fan turns on. Now we're seeing through the camera the same thing we see up here. So you can see it going through its little, it's homing at this point. Watch from up here. Now, the real question is going to be, will it load up its... Go through the homing process. So presumably it's going to go through that full multi-port leveling than it did previously, multi-point leveling, I should say. Like I say, what I really want to know is, will this thing manage to load that piece of filament? I'm also a little concerned, just because I know that this filament is rather brittle. It does fine normally, but the end, closer you get to the end where it was sitting out going to the other printer, the more brittle it is. The last thing I want is for this thing to decide, okay, yeah, it's going through its whole sequence, this whole little creep across the back, or whatever the heck it's doing. Turn the fan on. Now, coming down here, we are seeing what it's planning to print, showing the fans on, showing the hot end temperature. Like I said, I did not change the settings. So I normally print with this filament at 210, but I print with all my filament at 210 on the other. We're gonna run at the default, so I told it just generic PLA. And right now, looks like this thing's trying to level at 180 or so, or actually almost 160. Maybe that's because it's still testing, so it's shot up over 210. And of course the display goes out. Probably pull this piece of plastic out of the way to give you a little better view, although you're mostly seeing me now. Oh, we're jumping the temperature back up. It's interesting. So it's obviously dragging along the part. That seems to be pretty close to the bed, and I'm not sure. Is that really filament coming out? Appears to be, but is that my red filament, or is that something else? I don't know why it's that close to the bed. I'm not putting any glue or anything on here. I want to see what this thing's capable of. Go back and see if it's really pulling filament. I don't know what else it would be putting there if it doesn't have a piece of filament coming through. But I don't know, maybe they do a test print, or this is used, because I'm not seeing it actually build my raft. So we'll pause as we go to the back and try to push the filament. Okay, pushed on the filament, and it looks like it started coming out about right. Now it's looking like crap again. It's definitely my red filament now. That was only moving while I was actually pushing and helping it go in. The other thing that I like about MatterHackers is it actually leaves your heaters on so that you don't have to warm back up to start a print. So we're going to take two here with this little switch up here. Get it in view. Turns out that it's to the left is locked, to the right is unlocked. So apparently I will take the blame for that last print failing, because apparently it was unlocked. and so I had to actually force it through to get it to actually feed. Now, we'll see, I'm running it without the homing, or without the leveling tuning process, assuming that it will remember it from last time. And if everything goes well, we'll actually see this thing pulling filament on its own. So, I will say that this ceramic head does heat nicely. It's interesting though that they do this kind of integrated approach. I mean, it looks like they're going up to 230 when they were actually printing, so they were going even warmer than I normally run for fear of stringing. So we'll see. It is actually doing, I told it to run without the calibration, but it's doing that whole bed leveling tuning thing again. So, we'll give it a little bit. Since my battery's getting low here, I'll pause until we start printing. Just to give you an idea, you can look at the clock down at the bottom and see how many minutes we have been sitting here waiting on this thing to do its multi-point leveling process that I told it not to do, I thought. So yeah, this is a lot of time for a printer that's so fast. Hey, I'm all about leveling the bed and making sure it's good, and if we need to do that every time, that's fine. But wow, this is a lot. My Robo 3D only did a 9-point level, which was plenty for getting that bed fine, especially since it was a piece of glass. But I really wouldn't think this thing should be taking this long every single time I print. Not exactly sure what that is. That may be a sensor for the LiDAR, although I haven't seen it go over there. And unless this is the most infrared LiDAR I've ever seen, I'm kind of surprised we don't see anything off the bed. But it may be, It's truly not a visible light. Other thing about this, should pick up pretty good vibrations of this thing moving. And on this table, it definitely wobbles quite a bit. So, you know, part of the reason that I went with this newer design like this is it's supposed to have all the smart functionality that takes out the wobble that you get. And so I really hope that happens, and then I get this beautiful smooth print. Well, let's just see if it'll at least do a first layer. Okay, now it's spiking up, so it goes to the home position and it spikes the heat up. Runs down the side and cleans the head off, I guess. Then, okay, now we're printing. Like I said, it's going to print that brim first for this part. Which I don't really think it needs, but let's let it do it. Alright, so having that lever to the left instead of to the right in the load position actually does help. The interesting thing that I'm used to with a, you know, this isn't really a Bowden extruder, but I'm still used to having, when you have a Bowden or a feed like this, some sort of a load function for loading the filament. Here, I mean, you're going to have to heat it up regardless to pull it out. You've got that little release. They also, to remove it, they talk about taking and pulling the clip and actually pulling the tube back so that you essentially make sure that you clear the whole tube, I guess. Because the challenge, if you take hot material and you pull it through the tube, you can clog the tube. So that is probably why they want you to remove that clip. It's just I'm so used to those clips being very hard to get undone. But we'll see when I take this red out and go put my trusty black that I usually print everything in. You know, I don't much care about what the brim does, but frankly, I'm seeing some striations in there that, for a first layer, I don't know that I like. Now, that may actually be the edge of the brim where it's supposed to break loose. Okay, with that, I'm going to go put my phone on the charger, and we will come back and see what happens when we get a few layers in, if not completely done. I need to go back to the MatterHackers and use my default print and compare just how long this print would take on that. Because one of the things about buying this is supposed to be incredibly fast. And I really want to know how much is my $1,000 worth. Actually, this was just under $1,000 after tax, so MatterHackers had it on sale for $850, which was why I went with them. Other than the fact that I do use them, but it's the best price I found online, actually. Also supposed to be sending me some additional filament as part of their little starting thing, although it's obviously whatever junk they had, because it's like a lime green or whatever. I mean, it's stuff that I would never buy for anything I really wanted to print, but at least it's something, so I appreciate the thought anyway. For somebody starting out who doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't care what their colors are, it's just fun. Alright, well, as the fan kicks in, now we're up to our high speed. So, and now we start seeing the printer bouncing around, so hopefully all that accelerometer stuff really is going to do what it's supposed to. But then again, if the body wobbles a lot, and you don't have an accelerator in the body too, so that you're actually getting the differential between the bed and the head, that's not going to help you much. Anyway, enough commentary for now. Okay, so we're probably a couple hours in at this point, and things are looking decent. I'm seeing a certain amount of stranding, a little bit of spider web, but not too bad. This filament is actually the best filament that I have. One thing, as you can see on this table that it's on, this thing really bounces around. And so, I'm going to have to change tables. But otherwise, I would say it's not too bad. And it looks like it will compete. There's the whole issue with the effective filament. So, I'll just swap and go to putting it on this filing cabinet versus this little printer table that I have. The big difference, I think, between this and the Robo 3D that never gave me this problem is that all of the motion on this in X and Y are at the top. So it's a long way away from the base, whereas the Robo actually brought the head up, brought the print head up. The build plate stayed fixed, and then the build plate moved underneath the head. And so that is one of the significant difference in terms of the amount of wobbling that this thing does. So it's all the motion over here at the top. So before my table breaks, I'm going to definitely swap that. And with that, it's time for bed. It's almost midnight, but it's like wake up to a good print. It's definitely moving quickly between all the pieces. That's one of the things that this is supposed to be able to do, is just run faster. Okay, so here we are the morning after, and generally the print looks pretty good. And the reality is, I wouldn't say that it's any better than my Robo could do in terms of, you know, the shape here. This whole accelerometer based thing doesn't seem to have made that much difference. I will try putting this on a better table and see if that helps. One thing I'm seeing though that disturbs me a little bit is so apparently the end print goes over here in front of this fan, and obviously the fan must have been running when this happened, so it's trying to suck the filament into the fan. So that's not very smart. I don't know if they'll change that in the firmware update if they see this. But yes, that appears to be its shutdown routine, and so presumably the fan's on, so that would be cooling the filament as it drips, but it still dripped all the way down to the fan. So, oh well. So with this, the printer's, you know, it's at least appears to be working the way I would have expected it to, and I'm happy enough at the moment. We'll see if the quality control is any better on the rest of the components, whether or not this thing holds up. But so far it just was a disappointing out of the box experience with the loose screws bouncing around, but otherwise it seems to be okay. That, I'm signing off. Well, so I decided to show you one other thing here, which is, as I was taking the brim off of this, I noticed this weird defect down the side. The thing is, it's at a diagonal. So I don't know if this is somehow a layer buildup. It almost looks like it's a drip, but it's a drip away from the thing. So there's a bump at the end of each of these little trails, and that doesn't seem to be something that should be happening with all the special things this is supposed to do. But it's almost like, is it filament that gets blown down the side? It's not loose or anything, so it appears to be part of a true printing artifact. But I don't know what that is. I've never seen an effect like that. Very weird. So as a little addendum, my second print failed. Just trying to print one of these, and basically we clogged up. Took quite a bit to get the thing cleared, and I have to say on my Robo 3D, I don't know, I might have clogged once or twice through the entire lifetime of the product, but really just never had much problem. So getting a clog, or just a binding, it may not have been a clog, but getting this thing jammed up where it wouldn't feed into the extruder on the second print is a little disappointing. It was a pretty major pain getting the red filament back out, having to remove all the clips and the little blue captures and stuff, and even taking the tube out. I did spend some time trying to make the tube back at that back corner that was definitely crimped hard, making it a little rounder. And for this last print, which was for something that I print a lot of, and that this stretched the boundaries of the Robo 3D. It just barely fit, and I basically couldn't even do a perimeter. I ran with the default settings again just to see what I would get. Not overly pleased that that's not as smooth as I'm used to. This printed with a brim as opposed to, normally I would use a raft, but I just let it do its default, which it decided it wanted a brim. That seems, I haven't pulled it off yet, but that seems to have held pretty nicely all the way around. Usually the problem is the corners on this will stand up. I did print with the lid on. We had a cold front come through last night, so it's comfortable in the attic. I also put the lid on, and as I mentioned, now it's kind of already pushed down, but you can see all of that stuff is moving. So the Teflon is dragging across the glass top the entire time it's printing. So again, not ideal, but given Teflon is nice and slick, hopefully it won't be a problem over time. So I want to pull this off and just see how good it is. It's still going to be, I was hoping for a zero cleanup option here. The raft was always a pain, especially around the center where I actually have some lettering embedded in here. This should pop off this removable bed pretty easily, and then we'll see how much trouble it is getting the brim off. The other thing so far is, on the back of this plate, it says put glue on there. It's like, I shouldn't need to put glue on. And so far I haven't. So we will see over time how it does. But a couple other comments. One on this display. Hopefully they'll update the firmware. So of course on the failed print came in, and this is what I got when I brought it up. Oh, so the LiDAR and stuff did not work. So that was the one point I wanted to make. The other thing is, for example, during loading of the filament, you come in and you could turn the heater on here directly first, which is probably the better solution. But if you come over to the extrude, you can put a temperature in and you hit extrude, it'll heat up to that temperature, it'll try to extrude, and of course when it's clogged, it's sitting there click, click, click. And when it's done, then it just turns the heater back off. So that's a rather annoying behavior. Not to mention the fact that there's no fine control, right? I'd like to be able to say, well, just try to extrude just a little bit. Let me see if I've got the clog. Let me see if I've got this thing working. Instead, it tries to extrude a big long line. The other thing is, you'll be right in the middle of this stuff, and you can have been doing other things or whatever, but basically you will just have touched the screen and it will blink the screen. So apparently the wake up timeout to the turn off timeout is not actually tied to the last time you use the screen. It's tied to something further up in the menu or whatever. So you can be sitting here working stuff and it will just go out on you, and you have to hit the screen again to get it to wake back up. So they've definitely got some firmware work to do. So after popping the part off, I still have to clean the brim off, as you can see. But the nice thing is, now I get, assuming I keep the bed clean and stuff, I get a really nice smooth surface where traditionally with the raft, it tends to look more like what you see down inside where we're bridging here. So it would have almost a wood texture to it, which was kind of cool. And people seem to like it okay. But my only concern here is as you can see, it's not perfect. And I don't know if that's one of the fingerprint spots on the bed or exactly why that didn't print as smoothly as the rest of this. But overall, it's a pretty nice looking piece. The question will be, can I clean up the brim? You can see how I've got everything beveled coming up to the face. So I've got to somehow get that brim cleaned off, and without digging into the part too much, but also making it pretty. So with that, that's probably the last print I'm going to do for a little while here. And chances are I'll still print something more before I get this video piece together, so you may see something else tacked on the end of this, but we will see. So that's this Creality K1 Max. Oh, I did want to show my bonus box from MatterHackers arrived a day or so later. Like I say, they just picked, you know, it's a variety pack, but they didn't give you a choice. It's just, this is what they said they're sending. Didn't know that until after the order was placed. But we got red silky, which looks orange more than red. We got the, unless I'm going to start printing Army Man, the olive green. I guess I could print a lot of Yodas or something. Last olive green I had was from the very start of 3D printing, when people were trying all sorts of stuff and somebody was making it out of algae, and it stunk to high heaven. And then we have pink blue dichromat, so you can see it's half and half. Looks kind of like it's also a silk finish, although they don't say that. So again, this was just in addition to, so the printer was like $50 off what the list price was, plus you got this. So that was a pretty decent deal from MatterHackers. So one last thing to add to this video. I had hoped that this new printer would eliminate the chatter that you get when you're doing things like this, where you can see the shadowing that occurs, where the entire pattern kind of gets echoed. And I was hoping that the you know, this thing has a accelerometer supposedly and an AI that's supposed to help with overshoot and that sort of thing, but unfortunately there's still very visible echo of the print. So, but otherwise it did a decent job of printing all of this, and gives a nice result without having to use glue on the bed so far.